We had some rough ideas before, but the ideas were, well, we pick up groups at a time, maybe 10, 20, 30, and we'll move them, but not a whole mass of people. So we looked at a map, and I remember this vividly, of the world, and began to try to find locations. We looked in the theater just outside of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and we realized again, no, this is problematic based on what Tommy Franks just said. We began to look to Europe, and we realized that we would have some problems with Europe based on the fact that the European Court of Human Rights, that the Europeans would want to play a significant role or have a significant say in what we do. We looked to some other countries in the Pacific, but in those situations, many of these countries were asking for significant items in return. They would say, well, you know, we've got a great place, but there's just no road there. Or we need an airport. And then what happened, in the course of our conversation, someone in the room said, well, what about Guantanamo? Guantanamo is in U.S. control. We don't have to ask for permission. Guantanamo is not mainland United States. Because the last thing we wanted to do was to bring to our soil, in the 2 months after 9/11, 300 plus people that are Al-Qaeda, or at that time we played a role, or we believe could have played a role in the events of 9/11. We did not want to put our civilians, our people, in harm's way. We did not want to put our judiciary in harm's way. What we were saying is, imagine the pressure on the jurors, the bailiffs, the court reporter, the personnel, by having these people now in southern Manhattan and being a ripe target for further attacks. Now keep in mind, this is a time when the towers were still smoking, literally, and we're still in search of bodies. So we decided we did not want them in the United States. Guantanamo became attractive because of the points I just made. It also became attractive because it was an island. It added additional security. Now, at the time, we viewed this as a temporary solution, and we began to transfer the detainees in 2002, January 2002, to Guantanamo. What's fascinating about this is that immediately upon these transfers, more detainees were picked up, as you know, and we began to realize the complexity of the issues, the challenges in trying to figure out who these people were. They were carrying, obviously, no identification, maybe some pocket litter. They would be deceptive in telling who they were. But then we began to figure out that what we thought was perhaps at the time a group of Afghans, Taliban, Saudis, and maybe a few other nationals, turned out to be an organization that was much broader. Guantanamo at its peak, when we had 700 plus detainees there, had a population that represented 44 different countries. 44 different countries. We had Europeans, the Brits, French, Spanish, Danes, Swedes, Belgian. We had Australians. We know John Walker Lynn was picked up at Mazar-i-Sharif. Afghans, Pakistanis, the list goes on, Yemen, Kuwait, 44 different countries. So as part of our policy, we began a process of engaging these foreign governments, and that was my job, to try to figure out what to do with these individuals. We immediately notified them that we had these individuals in captivity. We invited each government to come to Guantanamo immediately to help us evaluate and assess these individuals. And we asked them, are you willing to take these individuals back? And if so, what will you do to help ensure that they do not go back to combat and threaten the lives of not only, obviously, our citizens, but the citizens of the world? As you can imagine, this was a delicate and difficult process. In the early years, many of these governments did not want to do anything. It took a lot of effort to get them to Guantanamo. In the early years, many of these governments would say, United States, publicly we will criticize you because we have to. But privately, we're okay with what you're doing. You can hold on to them. We think some of these guys, they pose a threat. Go ahead, we'll share information with you. Keep doing what you're doing. So we became, as the Secretary of Defense at the time said, the world's jailers. Guantanamo evolved into a more permanent institution to what we have today. Buildings were built. A whole judicial system was built around this process. And we became more and more entrenched. Now, we did have some success. We began to figure out who some of these people were. And as with every conflict, you realize that there are people that are picked up that probably should not have been. So we were able to release a lot of these individuals back to their home country. We set up a system where we basically broke down the detainees into 3 categories. Category 1 would be those that pose a high level of threat and needed to remain within the control of the United States. Category 2 would be those that posed a medium level of threat, that we believe something needs to be done with them, but we were prepared to transfer them back to the control of their home country. Category 3 would be those that pose little to no threat, and we would just simply release them back to their home country. Now again, under Category 3, we were able to let several, maybe 200 people go. Category 1 was difficult, as was Category 2. The problem that we found pretty early on is that these detainees would move within the categories. And what I mean by that is we had a situation where one day there was a detainee that was in Category 3, ready to go. And then just 2 days before his departure, we picked up some information on him that immediately moved him back to Category 1. We also had situations where we knew where some of these detainees were actually caught in combat, fighting, or in training camps. But when they were at Guantanamo, they just would not talk. They were uncooperative. So the U.S. government was placed in a position, well, what do you do with this person? This person is not cooperative. Do we let them go, or do we assume that they pose a threat? Because they are not cooperating, they're being deceptive. So many of our people erred on the side of caution and moved them to the threat category, and they were not released.